this is okay. So afterwards we will distribute the information and you can still download it. Then it's good if you keep your microphones muted during the sessions, as long as you are talking, because then you don't have any noise interference. But I see most of you have done that, so that's great. For the captioning, as I said, I will try to summarize very basic things, what the speakers are saying, and you have to enable a pop-up at the top of the screen to see the captions. Then I see most of you have discovered already the chat box, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. And please, if you have questions, it would be even better to type them in the chat box so that I can collect them. And at the end of the session, I will distribute the questions to the speakers. So because we only have 1 hour, I would suggest that during the session, please only ask questions if there's need for clarification or there are problems you cannot hear one of the speakers, or there's anything, any technical things that need to be clarified quickly. Anything on content, please write them down or keep them until the end. We will have enough time then to ask questions. And there is also at the bottom of the screen a function which is called raise hand. So this is for later when you want to ask a question. Then I can see that and I can ask you to say a question. Finally, yes, Pirko, do you already have a question, or was that just to test? Okay, so I guess it was just a test. And finally, if you want to join from a mobile or from the phone, that is possible, but as I sent you the information already, the easiest thing is via computer, as you're doing it right now, I suppose. And lastly, if possible, say your name before you speak and which organization you are from, so that we know who you are. It's also nice to get to know each other a little bit. And if there's any problems, email me. I will check my emails during the presentation. Yeah, thank you very much. So just a very quick introduction. I think a lot of you probably have heard something about TSI, but what is that actually? And I know that it's not the easiest issue to get acquainted with, but I think today we will try in a, let's say, easy and lighter environment to give you an introduction. And of course, if there are any follow-up questions later, then we can address that always in a second installment, for example, of a webinar, or answer your questions individually. And just to solve the question quickly, so this is what it means, TSI-PRM. It's actually just some EU jargon, you could say. Which means technical specifications for interoperability relating to accessibility of the Union's rail system for persons with disabilities and persons with reduced mobility. So that was a very short introduction, and now I hand over to my colleague Lena Nielsen, who is also a member of the working group on the TSI, and she will give a short introduction about the background and also what are technical specifications. And she will speak also via the platform, so she is not here in the office with us, so she will tell me when to forward the slides. Thank you.
Hello everybody, can you hear me?
Yes, very, very well, loud and clear.
Okay. And I'm representing the EDF expert network, as Maria said, appointed by the Danish umbrella DPO. And we go to the next, yes. Because in December 2006, one of the most important political and binding decisions was adopted by the United Nations to enhance our living conditions as persons with reduced mobility or disability, namely the UN Rights Convention, which the European Union and all of her member states are obliged to implement. And Article 9 in this convention says that states parties shall take appropriate measures to ensure to persons with disabilities access on an equal basis with others to transportation, both in urban and in rural areas. And of course, this goes much further than the context of this TSI-PRM, but it gives the general principle and intention to improve accessibility of rail travel. And related to the TSI-PRM, we can state the fact that we as passengers with disabilities have exactly the same need for being able to travel by train as spontaneously and independent as everybody else. And beside the Article 9 of the UN Rights Convention, it also states that we have a right to be independent of other persons. It says so in Article 3. We have the right to be treated with dignity, also in Article 3, etc. The TSI-PRM are a practical tool to implement the United Nations Convention. And the next slide, and the next again. Next slide. Because what are these TSI-PRM? It is a law of the European Union, and it is a regulation that provides technical specifications on how to make trains and stations accessible. It's a part of the Union's interoperability legislation for railways, which through the tool of harmonized standardization are developed to support the Union's policies of ensuring the cross-border free movement of people, us, goods, services, and capital within the internal market of the Union. And it's defining the minimum technical and operational accessibility requirements for the member states to comply with. And the next slide. And they had to comply with this in order to include the target groups of rail passengers with reduced mobility or disabilities in this cross-border rail system in Europe. In fact, this first aim should, through those common specifications, make it possible for me as a wheelchair user to travel by train from Copenhagen in Denmark to Vienna in Austria. And that sounds good. And the other aim is to harmonize these rail standards for infrastructure and trains to ensure the interoperability of the trans-European rail system, and that is for the European rail market to be able to cross borders. And that means that the TSI-PRM are one among other TSI's tools that are designed to open the rail market, making it possible for rail operators in France, Germany or Sweden to take over rail sections in Denmark or Belgium, etc. And the TSIs are drafted by the European Railway Agency and adopted as a decision by the European Commission and the member states. And the next one, we are going to look at how those technical specifications work. And the next one. And these specifications are binding technical rules that reflect the Union's overall accepted level of rail accessibility. They are supported by voluntary European standards to give more details, and they are drafted by a working party of the European Railway Agency with representatives from member states, the European Commission, various stakeholders like infrastructure managers, railway undertakings, train manufacturers and passengers, inclusive of representatives from EDF and AGE. And the next. And they are of course important because of their status being a law that is directly applicable in the member states as it is a regulation. And thus the TSI are a very powerful tool on the union level to implement the provisions of the United Nations conventions and thus improve accessibility. And next we have some examples of what these requirements are in the TSI. That could be the obstacle-free route, tactile and contrasting walking surface indicators, visual and spoken information, safety information and safety instruction, level access and boarding device, which wheelchairs that are transportable by train, doors and entrances, ticketing, information desks, assistance points, priority seats and wheelchair spaces, toilets, etc., etc. Next slide. And an example of the specification is the TSI-PRM definition of level access, here shown at a photo of a train from Switzerland, of a mother with a baby pram boarding the train and a wheelchair user boarding right after her. Level access from platform into the train ensures all of us to be able to travel independently without the really tiresome and barrier creating assistance from other persons. And the other photos at this slide shows a handrail at a staircase with braille indicating the number of the platform, and furthermore the handrail is provided with tactile arrows for indicating the direction and wayfinding. And this photo is from Holland. And now my final slide. Unfortunately, the TSI-PRM allow all kinds of way of boarding the trains and without any indication of first priority or best practice. It allows level access or the external monster lifts or the train fixed boarding device like ramps or lifts. The photos on this slide show this external lift. It's standing at the platform normally, and it is nicknamed the monster lift, which is not a dignified nor independent way of access. It creates deep dependence of the assistance from other persons, and this kind of lift is the main cause of the pre-notice claim of our rail travel of up to 48 hours before the travel. The other photos on this slide shows an onboard ramp fixed to the doorway of the train in 171 trains in Austria, allowing at least spontaneous turn up and go access, as the onboard ramps or lifts are operated by the onboard personnel. Well, I think it was my bit of the presentation. So, Peter, I think I leave the word to you now. Okay.
Thank you very much, Lina. I think this was a very good introduction. So now it's indeed Peter's turn. So he will explain more the history, how EDF and AGE became involved also in this decision-making or law-making procedure, and giving a little bit also the reasons why the TSI were developed. Unless there are now any urgent questions for clarification, I suggest we I just take some time to activate the camera, so I was a bit delayed there. I'm trying my best with the captions. I will now follow up and see if the captioner has joined, because I don't know the name. But for now, Peter will continue and I will try to continue typing.
Thank you, Mari. Good morning, everybody. My task really is to explain how it happened or what the history is. Um, for years, many years, the railway has had technical specifications, mainly on how it operated itself safely. Those were the initial concerns, that there should be the same thing all over Europe. It wasn't until 2003 that they started to look at the users, us, the people who require it, who are either PRM for whatever reason. And so as a result of that, um, governments recognize the value of the disabled, recognize the value of people going, and we had these three new TSIs, one of which affects us, which is access to people of reduced mobility. The other one was about railway tunnels and air pollution. And the EU had a draft mandate, and the thing that really you should understand, I think we should all recognize, is at that time where accessibility was concerned, all the different member states were at a different state of development. Some recognized the problem, some hardly recognized it at all. In some parts of the EU, the platform levels traditionally and historically were very low. In other parts, it was modern and it wasn't. So we started off from a position where everybody was different and everybody had a different view towards it. So the first task we had to do is what we called harmonizing, and we went through the harmonizing, and I'm on the next slide, Mari, if you wouldn't mind. The harmonizing provision, we weren't making it a mandate. We talked, Nina was talking quite rightly, that the TSI is mandatory now. It's part of the EU legislation. When we started, and I speak with 50 years on the railway, when we started, it was by no means mandatory, because we couldn't make it mandatory because there were so many different practices. The great thing that we've achieved in the 10 years that we've been on the working party from 2007 is that we've come such a long way, and we now know what it is we want, and we've now put, or the EU has put, some sensible legislation behind it. But it's important from a point of view of history to recognize we can't make things instantly change overnight. Wonderful it would be if we had flat access, but you must remember that a train, whether it's a TGV or ICE or Pendolino, all these trains, they have a 30-year life. So therefore, we are where we are with many things. We have to have ways of making it possible. And then when we build new, we make it compatible. So we're working sensibly, and AGE and EDF have been on this working party a long time. And we don't ask for the impossible, but we press very hard when we think that some of the member states and some of the people are not doing their best. So it's we are where we are. We are reshaping, remodeling, improving the TSI. We are not there to rewrite it and start again. We are where we are. I have finished, Mari. I have nothing more to say. Now I can answer questions when you like.
Right. Thank you very much, Peter. All right. Thank you very much, Peter, for this introduction. So I think this gives a good overview. Unless, again, there are any questions for clarification about this input, I will keep your questions. I saw that there are already some questions from Judith and David, so I will keep these for later. And now I'm handing over to Franz, who's sitting next to me, so I will just move over a little bit, and he will talk about the involvement of AGE and EDF in the whole process, and also tell you a little bit what we are actually working on, because this is maybe what is the most interesting part. So I will scoot over and leave this to Franz.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. This is Franz Monter, and I'm working as an expert for AGE, as a volunteer expert after a long time working at the Dutch Railways. What's in situation are we now? First of all, we are busy with the revision of the existing text. The existing text is, we say, quite good, but reading it after a few years, it is, you get some comments and some things has to be clarified and has to be put sharper, and of course there are a few developments that have to put in. But the major text is will stay. What's very important in this period from the existing TSI-PRM to the next version that will be, we hope, really realized in 2018, that is that there's an advisory body for the European Commission, and there are NIPs, national implementation plans, and there's an inventory of assets. And that is what we will talk about in this few minutes. First of all, what are we doing as EDF and AGE? There's a revision of text, and as I told before, it's not a complete rewrite, but it's not a complete rewrite and not new rules or standards, but it's more pinpointing and sharpening some text. In the working party, who are in the working party? All the railway undertakers are there, the infrastructure managers are there, EDF is there, AGE is there, the industry is there. And what we do in the working party is have a discussion about the best solutions. And it's not always the best solution for us.
Can you talk up a little bit and to the mic? Yeah, talk closer to the computer.
Closer to the computer. Okay, thank you. It's not always what we finally want, but very often it's always a compromise, because the railway system, as Peter said, is a very old system, and sometimes you have technical constraints or safety constraints. But in the discussion, we increase awareness and the understanding about the lawmakers, the industry, and those who are working in the railway industry. And what we do as AGE and EDF is keep pressure on it and try to convince and keep it all on agenda. And what we also do, we provide good practical examples, because maybe Peter and I are...
Just can quickly clarify something? Sorry, everyone, I understand that it's a bit of a problem because I'm typing here, which also makes another noise over Franz's voice. So if it's okay with you, I will not type right now, but if you can see Franz's face and with the slides, normally that should be all the written information. I'm really, really sorry about that, but maybe this is better because otherwise you have more interference. So I will just let Franz speak and you can read the information in the slides and clarify things if you need to, okay? Thank you.
And what we are very happy with is that Peter and I are very much experienced in the years in the railway industry, and so we can also provide good practice examples, not only in technical way but also in operational rules. So next. Yes, that one. Yeah. So what the importance of the TSI-PRM is that they provide clear, specific, and binding rules for rail accessibility, and in that way, it's quite unique that we have those rules in the railway industry as we are. And what the member states have to do, they have to make a plan and develop a long vision strategy for accessibility. They may have to make the plans for 10 years and have to update it every 5 years. And that's very interesting because that plans can be monitored and they can show us what progress member states are making. And we as EDF and AGE are involved not only in the drafting of the TSI, but also in follow-up, in monitoring the results. Yes. As said, it's a huge step forwards, but it's not a miracle. It's not a miracle solution for accessibility. We realize very much that we are coming from far, and the railway industry is a very old industry, and there are a lot of technical barriers there are very much technical barriers and old buildings, etc., etc. There are many technical requirements, meaning boarding devices and toilets, etc., etc. And some of those requirements should have gone much farther, but for several reasons, reasons of history, reasons of technical solutions, it's sometimes not getting far enough. What very much difficult will stay, I think, in the future is that in Europe there are in the end 2 different platform heights. We are talking about making accessible 35,000 stations, historical, some of them, old stations, new stations. New stations has to be built according to the new TSI, and also when you refurbish a station, you have to be upgraded to one of the chosen platform heights. What we'll see in the future is that the platform heights will be on national level on one height, but within Europe we still have 2 different heights. And there will be also always be some exemptions, like double-decker trains for technical or safety reasons, restaurant cars that will not always be fully accessible because of the layout of a train, etc., etc. So there's always something to wish, but and in the end, the implementation on national level is for some nations, from member states, quick, but some member states are very, very slow, and that's because of political will and because of the budget they want to spend on it. Yes. What are we doing? We monitor the implementation. There is a advisory board. The European Commission established an advisory board, and we are not only part of the working party making the text and participating in the text of the TSI, but the results will be presented to the European Commission, and we are in the advisory board to look over the shoulders and monitor it. If member states do have questions, we try to support them and to help them. What we are very busy with, at least what we try to be busy with, is to facilitate exchanging best practices. But to be not too harsh, it is very hard to convince the European Commission and the advisory board to work hard on best practice. And as EDF and as AGE, we believe that mainly facilitating the exchange of best practices would save a lot of money and would help each other very much. So we don't have to invent the wheels everywhere. And in the end, we are making recommendations. So that's what our role is in the advisory board. Then the next is the national implementation plans. It's very important. The TSI-PRM makes it necessary for member states to build strategic plans on accessibility. Those plans have a running time of 10 years, and every 5 years, they have to update those plans. What's in those implementation plans? They have to say a timeline, a financing strategy, prioritization, and they have to tell what are the targets they want to realize and in what time they want to realize. And it's very important that this implementation plans has to be formulated. They not only shall be, but they has to be formulated in cooperation with stakeholders on national level. And that means that representative associations shall be included. Representative associations of users, and some in some member states they are even part of a national working party, but in some member states we see they are more distance. And what we want you to be aware of it, that you are allowed to put your foot between the door and ask for cooperation. Yeah. As I see this on this slide, as I said already, the NIP runs over a period of 10 years with an update every 5 years, and there is and we have to be included in the discussion and in consulting. What you can influence is the NRPs are mostly written by member states, and in general the Ministry of Transport are organizing it and doing the job, doing the project. And well, you can influence those NRPs by asking to actively cooperating and working on it, and asking your Ministry of Transport to participate in the workshops or in the discussion. And important questions about the NIP is, what priorities have we made? Do they make only big stations accessible, or 8 lines? Why did they choose for big stations or several lines, or sometimes some railway lines not? Is it only in certain geographical areas, or is it all over the country? So it's very important to know what are the ideas behind the NIP, what are the priorities, and how long will it take, and how much will accessibility be improved? Then another important point of the next period is the inventory of assets. It's a kind of magic word, but the inventory of assets is a kind of website. It will be a very kind, friendly website, friendly database, and in this database you find all kinds of information about accessibility. It is you can see in the IOA, is there parking for PRM? Are there stairs, or are there ramps or lifts? Is there are there accessible ticket machines? Is there audible information? Sometimes about operational rules. Is the assistance available or not? And in a very accessible way, you can see in the IOA what is the situation from station to station. And the idea is that all the 35,000 stations will be put in the inventory of assets. And if you by the time the IOA is operational, you can have a look at it. it from your home, and you can see what how a station is what kind of obstacles there are in the station or not. Is the station accessible or not? And you can see by yourself what kind of obstacles you will meet by yourself or don't meet by yourself. So you can make a decision to travel independently or not, or do you need some assistance and how can it be organized? So that's about the IOA. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we're switching back now. So this was really, I think, the longest part of the presentation. So we have only one more speaker to go, which is Gunther Ancha, who is EDF secretary, and she will talk more about what is now still happening. So what are the remaining challenges and basically, yeah, what is actually the plan for this revision of the current text. I see already there were quite a few questions in the chat, which is great. I'm noting them down, and after Gunther has presented, we'll distribute the questions to the relevant speakers so that we have now still at least 10-15 minutes on the discussion. And so yeah, I'm handing over to Gunther, and I will again try to type to caption while Gunther is speaking.
Okay, hello. Can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
hear me?
we can hear you.
That's okay. Now I'm going to talk a bit more about the next steps we are going to take in order to provide the real implementation of this.
I can't hear.
You can't hear. And now it's better?
If you can approach maybe to the mic a little bit or turn up the volume, I can hear you okay, but maybe it's not loud enough for everyone.
Okay, I can try, but is it better now? I just, yeah. Can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me now?
I think some people only hear you very quietly, very low.
Very low.
It's almost impossible.
I'm sitting just nearby microphone. I cannot go closer anymore. Is it better?
Try,
Okay.
Gunther, try it like this.
I will
I will type as well, so it's low but clear.
low but clear. So the next revision is currently in the drafting process,
Go on.
and as you said already, that is very important for European Disability Forum and also AGE to continue to be involved and to keep an eye on the realization of it. Also, implementation is ongoing.
Sorry, Peter, could you mute your microphone? Because this also creates a little bit of background noise. Thank you.
The implementation is ongoing, and also Commission will publish a web tool, which is very important to plan accessible journey, inventory of assets. We talked about it already, and this web tool could be very useful for those who is trialing the first time or don't have a great experience and know everything before. So there is some kind of possibility to see how the travel looks like and if the person is ready to go through all these challenges, I would say, to go to the goal they'd like to reach. So on the next slide we still have some challenges. The first one is, of course, the lack of resources for society stakeholders to get the meaningful, and I would like to highlight again, meaningful involvement, because I have this experience in many countries and in my country too, that quite often you are just asked a few questions. You don't have a time as organization to be involved, and the involvement is not meaningful. It's just for tick, I would say. It's quite difficult to find a good experts who know the situations from one side, a very practical one, but from other side who know a policy, engineering and railway sector, because it's quite important in order to give a really good advice, not just to say we need it or we don't need it or don't like it. And there are still some lack of transparency of the national authorities. And the next slide. What can our organizations do? The first step is try to give some inputs to the mirror group, also to help to shape the EDF and AGE position and to be more involved, also to contact our national authorities in the country and to remind them that there are some obligations and it's not just a nice words we are talking about, and start to form some kind of alliance on national or regional level with the passenger associations, which could be very useful to provide accessibility also. And the next slide. Yeah. And the next slide is about the questions and answers. Thank you.
And also to all the other speakers. I think this was a really good start. I know it is really a lot of information, but we will now take your questions, and I have noted already a few. So the first one was from Judith and David, and they were asking about dog toilets, and we had several questions actually that were similar, so I will group them together. So basically under the topic, what is included under the TSI or not? So this was about dog toilets, and Pirko asked about staff shortages, and if there's a problem like in Finland when you don't have enough staff on trains to help you board, is there a rule about that? Kieran asked about if you have to have ramps at the entrance of stations. And Laia asked if for hard of hearing people, if it's possible to get information and pre-recorded messages. So I think all of these can be summarized more or less under the topic, is this included under the current TSI or not? I would maybe ask Lina to answer this. So what is included, because you had the slide where you had kind of a list with the different things that are currently included. So for example, dog toilets, the ramps at entrance of building, or a pre-recorded written message. Lina, are you happy to answer that question?
Well, it was a bit fast for me to get the points, but the technical requirements in the TSI-PRM requires an obstacle-free route, and it requires that when you give an information, you have to be able to see it and read it for the hard of hearing. So some of the questions are covered by the TSI-PRM, But if you can mail them to me afterwards, I shall find the precise answers to them.
Maybe I can just quickly, the ones that I know already by heart, I think is so at the moment, Judith and David, so dog toilets are not included under the scope, but this is something that could be included for sure in the future. And what Kieran was asking, if ramps are mandatory, as Lena just said, you have to have an obstacle-free route, but that does not mean specifically a ramp. It can also be a lift. So obstacle-free just means that you should be able to access it. And how that is done, that is not prescribed. So there are different options. You can have ramps, you can have lifts, etc. But that is the one thing. And for Laia, I can tell you for the information is that the trains have to have inside the train the display board that display the next station and the final destination. But again, also emergency information. We know that this is an issue and that has to be also, for example, available via other channels. So this is something already we have taken up in our position as well. I will now move on. So there were other questions. For example, Diogo was asking, who are the representative organizations? So we mentioned, of course, AGE and EDF, but he would like to know if state organizations are allowed also to represent persons with disabilities. Maybe Franz, can you answer that because you know who the other stakeholders are?
Stakeholders in the working party?
Yeah.
Stakeholders in the work party. Well, in the working party, first of all, there's EIM, this European Infra Management. That is the umbrella organization of the infra managers in Europe. There is the umbrella organization of the operators. Then there's the industry, is the European railway industry, or they are responsible for making solutions. And then several national organizations like the infrastructure managers and the national safety authorities. They are involved in the working party. So actually, you can say that the whole railway industry is not only the technical industry, but also the transport is involved in the working party, and they are discussing the solutions. And what we are doing is trying to see what are the borders of the solutions. And of course, from the side of EDF and AGE, we are trying to stretch the borders as much as possible.
Yeah, so just in short, no, a state organization in that case cannot represent persons with disabilities. That can only be AGE, for example, or EDF. And also, Judith and David were asking a follow-up question: if ANEC is represented? No, they are not directly represented, because that goes then when it goes to standardization. So that is really then ANEC is also represented in the working groups of Sense and Elec in most cases. We have the European Passengers Federation also, who is in the TSI-PRM. So I hope that answers your question. I had two questions about the inventory of assets, so the IOA. The first one was from Annemarie, and she asked, where can you find the IOA? And Yoga was asking, who can input information? I think this is very important, and maybe I can refer this again back to Franz, since he was talking about that. So basically, where can you find it, and who can input information, and how?
The inventory of assets is now in a prototype stadium. There are, as far as I'm informed, from ERA, they are trying to organize some testing groups. It's not public yet, but we think that in 1 year, 1.5 years, it will be public, and then it can be used. So I hope this answered your question, or
and everyone can give feedback, right? That was
yes.
something we said
Sorry,
But yep.
France, we ought to say that it would be unwise if it was open to the public until it's clear that all of it is right. Otherwise, people could input to it and believe that what was there was absolutely right, whereas at this stage we're still inputting to it. So it's better not to mislead. I think it's better that they shouldn't be involved until there is at least something you can rely on. That's one of the difficulties, I think.
Yeah, so basically the first step will be for the inventory of assets. It's actually the job of the railway operator, so SNCF or whoever in which country you are, to do that, or Deutsche Bahn, for example, in Germany. And then you will have this database, and then there will be, and this is something we insisted on very much, a feedback function, so that every passenger, every person who is traveling can put, for example, this is not correct, or this is actually not accessible. So this, I think, will be very useful for the inventory of assets. I had 2 questions from Autism Europe and from Olga, I think, about the accessibility in terms of cognitive accessibility and the easy to read. Maybe I could ask Peter, I don't know if you know this in terms of the scope. Do you have an answer to this, if this is included in the TSI?
You've hit upon the one thing that isn't as clear as it should be, and that is the fact that what could be called hidden disabilities, autism, the early stages of dementia, cognitive difficulties, that renders someone to be a person of reduced mobility, but the system has difficulty in recognizing that condition, and the TSI does not actually go anywhere down that road. What the TSI is doing is making all the things in place. The one thing the TSI doesn't do is ensure that everything is adequately staffed. What is wrong with right across all the member states is that wherever you look, people are looking to take away human faces and replace it with information technological solutions. That sounds wonderful and it suits a proportion of society, but persons of reduced mobility, whether it's a hidden mobility or an obvious mobility, require the presence of staff. It's no good having a clever train and nobody on it to assist somebody who can't make the clever stuff work. So you've hit at the one thing that is missing in all of this, and that is how you make the whole system staff itself properly.
Peter, I think that was clear. I have one more question from Pirko, which was actually we didn't answer yet, and that was a question about standards. And she was asking, so the standards that are related to the TSI are voluntary. So how is it actually checked that they are being used? If it's voluntary, is there any monitoring? And maybe this is a question for Lina, because I know that you also were involved with those standards for the TSI.
I don't think anybody has to follow up on these standards, but there you can do something in the DPOs, asking your politicians and their staff if they are followed. But another thing I could suggest is that EDF, AGE and others make an easy to read TSI-PRM and the exactly standards that they should support, and where to find them, because it's a very complicated area. So it could be a task to have a very good thing developed for more understanding, to be so it is easier to understand all these complicated things, and also to find them, where to find all this stuff.
Thank you, Lena. I think that is correct. That's actually in the end one of our problems as well, where to find this. I have two more questions, and I would say now we are almost over the time. So type your last questions that you have in the chat box, or raise your hand virtually. Let's say we can take a couple more questions, but for now these two questions otherwise are the last ones. One is by Doris, and she was asking if the TSI also covers public transport such as trams and metros. And another question again on the inventory of asset by Laia. She is asking when will it be available. So I will refer this to Franz since he's the expert on the IOA, and he will also take your other question.
First of all, is the TSI also for buses and planes and all other kinds of transport modes? I can be short. It's very pity. It's only for the train and for the railway system. And not for tram, etc. So it's a pity, and maybe it's a good example that and the other transport modes will one of those days in the future will follow the same road as the railway industry. About when will IOA be operational? As I said before, by now I think the prototype is almost as ready. And what we are asking the European Commission is do a real live testing with the end users, so we can fine tune it. That's a question, but it's still a bit in discussion as I'm informed. And the timetable, as I say, so it's about 3 years. Then it will be. The idea is that it will be operational in 3 years. We put a lot of pressure on it from EDF and from AGE to make it as fast as possible. We ask for 2 years, but the railway industry says 35,000 stations putting in the database. That's quite a lot of work. They try to make the burden a bit bigger than we think it really is. But by now, as everything goes as smooth as they say, it will be in 3 years. But we ask for testing in the next few years for on national level, so that there can be that you can let you comment on it and fine tune the IOA. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we have one last round here of questions. Sorry, Diogo, I forgot to mention one of your questions before. So about the national mirror groups, there were 2 questions. Maybe Peter could answer these. So the first one is, where can we find the national mirror groups and how can you join them? I think this is quite important. And maybe Peter can answer this. Then one more question I can quickly answer to Diogo about the IOA before Peter answers the other question is how will we be able to join the trial? Well, we're discussing with the Commission. We want actually, as Franz said, a proper testing session, but we can for sure forward your information so the Commission, if that happens, can contact you. And also if others are interested in testing, please send us your contact details. We are pushing very hard for this testing session to be organized and paid for by the Commission, so let us know if you're interested. And now, Peter, would you be able to answer the question about the national mirror groups?
Yes, as best I can. The best way to get into a national mirror group would be to go to probably the equivalent, if you take the UK example, although I don't represent the UK, I represent AGE platform in Brussels, and I'm not part of the mirror group in the UK. But to join the mirror group in the UK, you would need to go through the Department for Transport or the Office of Road and Rail, Office of Rail Regulation. So in any of the member states, there will be the equivalent of the Department for Transport or the Office of Rail Regulation. And therefore, they invite usually organizations like National Institute for the Blind, via AGE UK, many of the recognised groups. So if one belongs to a group of whatever sort, that group could contact the government department as appropriate in whichever member state. As I say, I'm not a member of the UK one because I represent Brussels and not the UK. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Actually, for some mirror groups, we know also who the responsible people are. So if you're interested, please contact us and we will try to put you in touch. It's not in every member state the same as Peter says, but if you are interested, please put that in an email and we will try to put you in touch directly. And also quickly answering Diogo's question about if only cross-border services and stations are concerned. No, actually the TSI covers the complete railway network of the EU, which is great, and it's a big improvement because in the beginning, indeed, it was only high speed, so only the TGVs and ICEs, etc. And now it also covers regional trains and all train lines, basically. So that is already a huge progress. The problem is still that the member states can prioritize themselves. So they don't have to make everything immediately accessible, but they can say, for example, we only make bigger stations accessible. They have to make a plan, exactly like what Franz was explaining about the national implementation plan. But in a sense, every member state can decide still where they start and how they finance it. And so that can result in this very paradoxical situation that still some new stations are being built or renovated, which are not accessible. And this is also one of our main criticisms of the TSI at the moment. So I think Laya's question now is the last one. We have to finish. You already have been very patient with us. The question was if there are graphics about accessibility reality in different countries. Like a report with the accessibility situation. At the moment, this is not existing yet. This was a little bit the idea of this inventory of assets, because we always came to that point that we didn't really know what the situation was. So that's why we will collect this information, or the Commission will collect it through this inventory of assets, and then theoretically you could easily make a report from that. So this will be happening, but unfortunately not tomorrow, but probably rather in 2 or 3 years. So I hope this has answered most of your questions. Again, I'm very, very sorry about the captioning, and last time it worked very well. But so please, if there are follow-up questions, let us know. Here are some useful links you can see already. The presentation you have already, but we will also upload it on the EDF website, and for AGE platform I will check if that is also possible, and we will have the full recording with all the questions, and I can make a summary of the questions and answers if you like. Since now I could not caption it, I saw that Marina was asking, I can do that for you and make a separate document so that you have at least then some of the most common questions and you can use it later. So I hope you enjoyed it. It was great to meet you all. Let's stay in touch, and maybe for a second installment of a webinar, we'll see you again. Have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.